Welcome to our fifth of this year's collaborations with Riot Games for Latin America. If you want to catch these guides in Spanish, then be sure to check out their channel here. Are you tired of your games being decided over coin flip teamfights around Dragon? The usual takeaway low elo players have from these losses are, if my teammates played better, then we would have won, or I shouldn't have gotten caught and died. What most players don't consider is they shouldn't have been in a position to take a 50-50 teamfight in the first place, and that 1 to 2 minutes of poor macro probably led up to these risky teamfights. Today, we're going to teach you how mastering your macro is the best and most reliable way to control the game in solo queue and leave the outcome of the game in your hands regardless of what role you play. To understand macro, there is one very simple concept that you need to understand. There's 3 zones on the map that you'll want to learn. They are the collection, neutral, and pressure zones. Minion waves are the most consistent way of acquiring gold in the game. What you'll want to do is scout at all times in which zone the minion wave is in. Their names are pretty self-explanatory. When waves are in your collection zone, you'll want to move toward there to farm the wave to make sure that you're not missing out on the gold and XP. Afterwards, you'll ideally want to push the minion wave through the neutral zone all the way up to your opponent's pressure zone. So, what happens then? Well, that question is easily answered if you just flip the zones around and view it from your opponent's perspective. The pressure zone that you push the wave into is now in your opponent's collection zone. By pushing it there, you're forcing them to respond to the wave and go farm it, unless they want to miss valuable gold and experience. When both parties understand this concept, you'll begin to see a bit of a macro rhythm in your games. For example, a side laner pushes a wave into the pressure zone. Having fulfilled her duties, Camille is now free to group up with her team. On the other side, the enemy Aurelia is now pressured into going down bottom to farm the minions placed in her collection zone. Aurelia farming gives Camille and her team a momentary numbers advantage to potentially pressure something on the map. But as Aurelia pushes the wave back into Camille's collection zone, she'll need to return back to bottom. Aurelia's team is now the one with the numbers advantage. The cycle should then repeat over and over again until eventually one team makes better use out of the numbers advantage and scores a significant lead. Of course, that pattern isn't at all what happens in your game, is it? Well, that's for a couple of reasons. First, in lower elo brackets, players actually aren't doing proper risk assessments on whether they should be in a side lane or not. Think about how often you've had this thought. If I go to catch that wave, my team may die in mid because I left them alone. I have to stay here and make sure they don't throw. If you feel that way often in your games, that's a mentality you need to fix immediately. Consider it this way. Imagine you're playing ADC. You're afraid your mid laner will feed, so you go lane with them at level 1 to make sure that they can't possibly die. That's completely troll, right? You would probably be reported, and rightfully so, since you'd just be sharing farm and experience in mid while the enemy ADC farmed bottom for free. Well, that idea doesn't change all that much, even as the game goes on. Yes, the value of waves relatively goes down as you level up, but that doesn't mean that waves are any less important during the mid stages of the game. Instead of viewing it as a risk to leave your teammates alone, you should adopt a new mentality. The risk isn't that your teammates may die while you farm a side wave, but rather that by grouping with your team, you risk falling behind by not farming efficiently. That tends to be the reason in low elo why you don't see this smooth back and forth of collecting and pressuring with waves that we discussed. In higher elo brackets though, the reason it's not seen as often is actually because players are actively trying to disturb the flow and gain edges over their opponents by exploiting the predictable patterns based on this concept. Let's show you an example of what we mean. In this clip, we have Sylas pushing the top lane wave into the pressure zone before taking his recall. As he bases, we can see that the enemy Fiora has quite a bit of pressure on the bot lane tower, so Sylas will opt into teleporting down there to defend it as quickly as possible. He then looks for Fiora a bit before conceding the chase and going back to finish pushing his wave into the enemy's collection zone. This is exactly what the enemy Fiora is expecting. Switching over to her POV for a moment, we can see how she intends to punish the Sylas. After pushing, he's likely to rotate toward mid to group with his team for a numbers advantage. So she sets up in the river brush and pings her Nocturne to come over as well. Unfortunately for Nocturne and Fiora, their play was good, but Aurelia was ready for it. Soon after the fighting commenced, she immediately teleported over from top lane to join the fray and turn the gank around. It ended up being close, but she and Sylas came out ahead and extended their lead by taking the bot lane tower as a reward. Let's make something clear. This was a challenger example of how to play around the 3 zones. Fiora knew that most people who clear waves take the greedy route toward mid, so she could set up a pick with Nocturne. On the other hand, Aurelia knew that the enemy may be trying something and was ready with her teleport to counter the enemy's aggression. Like we said though, this is a high elo example where everyone is constantly playing around side lane pushing. How can you apply this without your teammates that follow up or defend you like this instantly? Well, there's still a lot that you can do based on the 3 zones, so let's start with the basics. The first thing to understand is proper lane allocations. Try to figure out what the next objective you'll be fighting over is going to be. You'll want the player on your team with teleport, usually the top laner, to go to the lane furthest away from that objective. So as an example, let's say Dragon is spawning in 3 minutes. Ideally, you'll want Nasus to go top since he can teleport down when the fighting begins. Then you generally want your mid laner in the lane opposite of that. So in this case, we'd have our Orianna take over bottom. Lastly, the ADC and support should almost always be the ones to settle in mid. That's because ADC is the most vulnerable of all the carries, and mid tends to be the safest place for them to be. Not only that, this way the support is able to stay in mid lane, which will grant them access to the whole map. Through mid, they can get vision anywhere it's needed, rotate to whatever fight breaks out, whatever. But we all know what you're thinking. Yeah, that's not happening in solo queue. And you're absolutely right. Setting up the correct lane assignments, especially in low elo, is a wishful thought at best most of the time. That being said, knowing what is correct will be good for you in the long run, but let's focus on what you can do to make the best out of a bad situation anyway. Take a look at this Ezreal game. At the start, both him and Neeko are mid lane sharing farm. It's fine for now, but around this exact moment, Ezreal just got pivotal information about what his next best move is. Based on the information at hand, what do you think you should do as Ezreal in this situation? So at around this moment, it should be clear to Ezreal that Neeko doesn't understand it's her duty to go and collect the bot lane wave about to crash at their tower. It looks like she's pathing up with the rest of the team. In solo queue, it's on you to pick up on your teammates' slack when it comes to their poor macro. Ezreal's best move would be to head down toward bottom to catch the wave for multiple reasons. First, there's no objective to fight over at the moment. Dragon is down and the enemy team can't force Baron at 20 minutes, even with a numbers advantage. Not only that, but as ADC, a genuine concern when it comes to farming sideways is the fact that they're so fragile and easily killed. Thankfully though, Ezreal's team already has some vision established, which would allow him to walk down there safely, claim the waves, and then walk back to mid without having to worry about any ganks coming his way. Instead, Ezreal just continues sitting in mid, not doing a whole lot. The wave goes to complete waste down there, and that's a huge chunk of gold and experience lost for no reason. Yes, it wasn't Ezreal's fault initially that Neeko was just sitting in mid, but it is his fault for not making up for her mistake and going down there himself. On the topic of who can and can't pick up side lanes, there's something important that we've yet to cover in detail: the pressure zone. Pushing into your opponent's side of the map can net you a great deal of advantages, but not every champion can push so aggressively. Thankfully though, for every role, there's certain types of champions that can push the side lane on their own. Camille, Jax, Hecarim, Master Yi, Fizz, Echo, Vayne, Kai'Sa are all great examples of champions who can push very aggressively to pressure the side lane. All these champions either have great mobility or powerful dueling capabilities, which is perfect for the skirmishes you'll find by pushing alone. If you're playing something with low mobility and poor dueling abilities, however, you won't be looking to push too far into that pressure zone. Generally, at most, what you'll want to do is collect waves and then push them past the neutral zone. It doesn't pressure your opponents that hard to do this since you're not crashing waves into their tower, but it is unrealistic to expect these types of champions to push any further than that. But don't treat that as an enforced rule. Most of the things we're covering in this guide are just general guidelines. There is nothing stating that a control mage can't push deep into enemy territory on their own. It just depends on the game's circumstances. In this case, Victor sees all of the enemy team on the top side of the map. Therefore, he knows he's able to put pressure in this lane without much worry, since it's impossible for anyone on the enemy team to be down here. Another example would be this Zoe. Zoe usually has no business split pushing against a Kiana most of the time, but since she's so far ahead in terms of gold and items, she's actually able to reliably duel her and put pressure in a side lane. Just keep that in mind. To really improve your macro, you have to adapt to the specific games that you're playing. League has so many variables that it's impossible to tell you exactly what you should be doing at all times. Alright, now on to the final topic that we want to cover, which is vision. Here's a general guideline on the type of trinket that you'll want based on what you plan to be doing in the game. We'll explain why in a bit. If you're playing something likely to be pressuring side lanes with, then we recommend taking the warding trinket. If you're playing a champion who can't side lane well with low mobility and dueling potential, then you'll want a far sight ward. Lastly, jungles and supports will typically default to sweepers. Let's get into why we recommend all of these choices. First, let's run through another game featuring a Fiora. Fiora is a champion notorious for wanting to side lane. The problem is she went sweeper instead of the warding trinket that we recommend. Generally, if you want to side lane and clear vision, we'd suggest just buying control wards to do so rather than committing to a sweeper, and we're about to see why. Fiora manages to score a kill onto the overextended Ezreal, but now faces a problem. Without a warding trinket, she's completely blind. Despite getting a kill, she's at risk if she continues to try and pressure the side lane. Nevertheless, she does so, and surprise surprise, she's collapsed on by Maokai and Annie. The first point we'll make is that if she had a warding trinket and placed some vision before pushing, she would have been alerted to the collapse on her much earlier and could have easily backed off before they arrived. Not only that, but the vision would have helped her tremendously while they chased her. She's running away from them completely blind, not knowing how they plan to corner her. Had she established vision, it would be much easier to navigate the enemy jungle and juke the enemy team indefinitely. Fiora would have known not to commit her teleport here, but rather to keep juking. Instead, without proper information, Fiora dies a rather pointless death. Basically, if you're planning to push aggressively, more often than not it'll be better to have a warding trinket. Being able to appropriately react to people collapsing on you is a huge deal as a side laner, and clearing vision is something that can be done by just buying control wards anyway. And this brings us to an important point about junglers and supports. Remember how we said that they should generally buy sweeper? Well, that's because denying your opponent's vision while they push is a massive pain for them. We just went into detail about why vision is so important for side laning. Well, denying it from your opponents will relieve a ton of side lane pressure, as they won't be able to split push effectively without those wards. But the game isn't quite that simple. The enemy team has an option against this. Say that you're the jungler on the split pushers team, and you know the enemy support has been denying your Jax's vision. Well, you can use your sweeper to sneak into the enemy jungle and set up a trap as they try to clear wards. Do you see where we're going with this? Your macro decisions are almost always going to be based on the collection and pressure zones. What comes next is figuring out how your opponent wants to counter what you do, and then you may want to consider figuring out how to counter their counter. Lastly, for immobile champions who suck at dueling, we recommend the blue Farsight ward. The reason why is simple. As we said, for immobile and weak duelists, they'll generally at least want to catch waves in their collection zone and then push them past the neutral zone. That way, even though you're not hyper pressuring your opponents, you'll still force them into their own collection zone. Well, you need to consider that pushing like that is very predictable and easy for your opponents to punish, which is where the blue trinket comes in. Syndra this game noticed that the enemy Akali was in the area since she killed her control ward in the Tri-Brush. Syndra wants to keep pushing a bit more, but will easily get soloed by Akali if she's here, and that's why you want a blue trinket on vulnerable carries. You can scout for yourself whether you can keep pushing or whether you should just walk away and leave the wave as is. We just want to reiterate that we're just offering the tools that you need to make proper macro decisions in your own games. The rest is on you to figure out what to do in each unique game you find yourself in. That's what makes League of Legends so fun and so replayable. There's so many variables that figuring out the correct choice can be a real head scratcher at pretty much any time. That being said, as long as you understand the 3 zones where the minion waves can be, then you'll always be one step ahead of your opponents. By the way, you should know where these videos come from. Our hyper improvement platform, SkillCapped, is by far the best place to be if you want to actually improve at League of Legends. You can input your rank before signing up to see where we think you'll climb to. If you don't reach that rank while actively using SkillCapped, you can claim a full refund. That's like a gym membership guaranteeing that you'll get ripped. We offer this because our service really does work, and if it doesn't, then you shouldn't pay for it. So be sure to check us out after this. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed, and we'll catch you next time.